Hi, for this video we're going to be taking a look at creating custom IDs for your renders. So you can have a character render that looks like this and then also create IDs for that character which could be used in look development or compositing. I will put timestamps in the description, and if you found this video useful, please subscribe and maybe take a look at the Patreon. I do offer a Q&A email service, so you can email any of your VFX queries and I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. So the result would be for this, so we have this custom pass that I made. When I look in the red channel, we have this dirty look. When we look in the green channel, we have this inverted dirty look, and when we look in the blue color channel, we have this. So all of these passes are basically like separate IDs that compositors could use for further color corrections, or within Maya you could actually use these, extract these yourself just through shaders, create layered shaders, that sort of thing. What we're going to do is we're going to start in Substance. That's where I created these. So this character is actually Meet Matt, which was created by Algorithmic, who creates Substance Painter. The model should still be available online. I downloaded this a while ago. They do a competition where you can texture it as best as you can. So on the right hand side, you'll see it has 3 UDIMS. I don't know if that was standard or whether I changed that or not, but I added the just a smart shader, still painted worn, and I think I did it on 1001. I'll just hide all of these and then talk about what I was doing. Okay, so I dragged and dropped still painted worn, and then I right clicked and went to instantiate across texture sets, and then I clicked on the other two, and what that does is it pretty much just duplicates onto the other one. So if I go to 1002, you'll see it's also there. And this symbol on the right hand side, when I click on this, because 1001 is where I created this instance, it's telling me that 1002 and 1003 are also related. So if I change anything within here, it affects the other UDIMS, which is a pretty cool feature. This is the legacy method, which means I'm using an older Substance Painter copy, basically. So anyone in a newer version, you might be using the paint across tiles, which is a bit more GPU heavy, but your layout will look a bit different. Okay, so what we want to do is, actually I'm going to delete these. Okay, so go to your texture set settings. When I imported this model, I will just say I went to, I set it up as 4K and just left it as default PBR metalness. I went to Bake Mesh Maps, turned it to none, so I turned all these off. I didn't actually change anything, I just did Bake All Texture Sets. So that means we can create procedural, like baked textures essentially. And then I added still painted worn. Don't even think I changed anything. Did the instantiate across texture sets. And then the next step is to go into your texture sets. So unfortunately, using this legacy setup, we have to do it manually, which is quite annoying. So we have to add these separate ID channels for each layer. So what we do is on the channels, we go plus and add user 0. And then again, we'll hit plus again and add user 1. Plus again, add user 2. So these are just custom channels that are made. And then we have, by default, this is L32F. So the L just means luminance, and then 32 bits, 32 means 32-bit float texture. So we don't really need that. If you look at the roughness and metallic, they're L8. So 8-bit is 256 color values, I believe. And so L16 would be luminance. The 16-bit color values, I think, is about 56,000 color values. So if it makes a massive difference for you, standard for the companies that I've worked at for luminance or scalar textures such as metallic, roughness, normal, etc., you would generally pick 16-bit, and then I think the base color is 8-bit. So you want to try and be as conservative as possible. So what I've done is I've just named that RGB, and then these are all AL16. As I said a moment ago, oh actually, yeah, because I already added these textures, sorry, these texture sets for each of these, they're already there. But unfortunately for anyone watching this on your project, if you're working with a legacy setup, you will have to do the same for each channel. So once we've done that, in this material dropdown, you can see we have R, G, and B. So we go there and there is nothing there. So my first point of call that I did was just to make sure there's no information there. So I had the steel painted worn. So I'm looking at the red channel and I created a layer. So in fact, I could do this. Now let's create a fill layer and turn off all of these. I might as well just delete what I did. Actually, for the moment, I'm just going to leave that there. It's because I don't want to completely destroy what I've already done. So yeah, you create a fill layer and kill everything here. And this is just for safety purposes, basically. Because sometimes if you're just chucking in smart materials, things like that, it might have RGB turned on. And by default, if it has them turned on by 1, it will screw up any mask that you're making. So you might actually want this nearer the top. And so we've zeroed them out, and you can call it RGB underscore zero out, something that's useful. And then, like I did with the steel painted for this, I also did instantiate across texture sets. So I could do that now, but I don't need to. So I've already got it. So I'll turn that on, and you can see it's doing something. Well, that's not doing something to the bottom, which is not so great. Let's just check if it's in the other one. Oh, it's because it was hidden. Cool. Okay, so the next thing after that was to create an ID. So you can see each of these layers I've got. So that this is obviously up to you, but we can now fill each layer, each ID with information. So the R channel, let's turn this on. I think I need to go to my other UDIM. I'm just going to turn all this information on the other UDIM because that's kind of a bit deceiving. Okay. It's because these are all shared across. So as I started to turn off these layers on other UDIMs, that's where it got a bit confusing. But all I've done is, so I'm on the red channel and I created a fill layer. I'll replicate what I was doing now. So I create a fill layer. I turn off everything apart from the red channel. And you can see by default it's 1. So I right click, add black mask. So there is now 0 information there. And then I did right click, add generator. So there's nothing there, so we need to pick a generator. And then dirt. And you can see what it's doing is it's now saying the default, the dirt generator is just creating this fractal pattern based on the baked mesh map. So it's probably using the ambient occlusion, if we take a look at that. So, whoops, I need to go to the red. So as you can see, the shadows are white, and the white, what is it? The shadows are white, and then it's basically just displaying where dirt is and is not. But anyway, we can forget about that for the moment. So that is one ID. So we can use this for look dev. So whatever's white is on and whatever is black is essentially off, which means if we wanted to create a layered shader in Maya, then we could actually create a shader and then use this as a mask as well for the character, which I will explain later. So let's turn this on. So this is what that looks like for the whole model. So if we did use this in Nuke or Maya for look development and we created a layer shader, for example, all the white bits would be the visible bits if we used it, created a layer shader. So it's pretty cool. So we can just add extra dirt. If we don't have time to go back to texturing, that's when this could be useful. Right, now let's change to the green channel. So for the green channel, I did exactly the same, with the only difference being, so I created the fill. Whoops, let's turn this on. And I might have actually duplicated it and just gone to this main fill bit and just turned on the green channel, and you see it's on a value of 1, so white. And then in the dirt generator, I turned invert on. So if I switch between the green and the red, you see it's just the inverted thing. So that could also be useful. And now for the blue channel, I decided to do something even more different. So I actually painted some stuff. So to do that, let's turn that off. Oh yeah, I see what I did. Okay, so for this one, I didn't instantiate this across UDIMS. These are actually bespoke painted stencils. So you see for UDIM 1001, we just have that snowflake thing. And yeah, okay, so the body has the skull one and the base has that other one. But to do this, I just created a layer. Where is it? Layer. And then I went to alphas, somewhere here. And I picked a symbol. So let's pick caution. And then just stamped it somewhere. So there we go. So now we have that, and I did that, and let's rename that to B_ID_stencil, something memorable. And I did the same for the other ones. So these will be our IDs, but if we go back to material, that has no impact on this character. So let's go to export. And what I'll do is I'll actually show you my settings. So this is stuff, these are the settings that I would actually use while working other places as well, not just at home. Okay, the export settings will need, what I'm going to do is I will use a default one and I'll recreate it as I recommend. This is what people should be using, although this is obviously my own opinion. So I'll get the Arnold UDIM standard because we're using Maya for Arnold. And so I duplicated that, that creates copy. So I'm going to change that and call it default. Whoops. So this will become my default, I guess. So all the files I'm going to change to TIFF. Yeah, there are different reasons for using different formats, but PNG is not so bad. If you use Mari, let's delete emissive. We don't need that. If you're using Mari, it would be EXRs that get exported. I used to use Targas, but they're pretty massive in size. Okay, so we've got base color, metalness, roughness, normal, height. So the scalar textures, such as metalness, roughness, normal, height, they're all 16-bit, which is just because there's more color information. 8-bit, as I said earlier, is 256 color values. 16-bit is something like 56,000. Okay, so we've got all these, but how do we get our custom ones, our RGB? So now what we could do is press RGB at the top, and now we just have this blank channel. So in here we can click the RGB and do split/collapse RGB. And now on the right hand side on the input maps, you'll see all these user ones. So we added user 0, 1, and 2. So now we can drag user 0, which was our red channel, to here. And then we can say, oh, we want this to be the red channel. And then we could do the same with user 1, because that was our green. So do the same and pick green channel. Same for user 2. and this would be the blue channel. So the only thing we need to do now is change the name. So we could just copy and paste this. So there we go, and I will just change the name from height to ID. And when we go to list of exports, we can see this is how it's going to come up. So it's inheriting the mesh name. So this was meet mat model from algorithmic.com, somewhere like that. And then underscore pass dot UDIM number. So we need that UDIM number because that's how Maya will read the textures. So once you've done that, you've set up your template like that. Oh, I've just realized one thing. My ID was on PNG, so change that to TIFF. Might as well do it at 16-bit because it's pretty much going to be used as a scalar texture. Okay, so once you've done that, then you can actually hit save settings. But I've realized the output, it's changed it. So we just need to make sure the output template, so now we can find the one should be all the way at the bottom. So it's called arnold UDIM underscore default. And then the file type based on output template. So it's picking from the template, which is good. So that means they're all going to be TIFFs. And then the size, if you like, if you want them the same size, you can do this as a sort of override. But if you've been changing each UDIM size to a different texture size, you should just leave it to this. So you can use that to optimize. Anyway, that is fine. So let's export that. Okay, the export's done. So before I go into Maya, I'm just going to load this in Nuke just to show you what is going on. So the ID, as long as you've done that correctly, you should have something like this, which is pretty trippy, really. But you can see the different color values we've got. So in Nuke, if you press R, you get the red channel. So this was our dirt generator. And if you press G, so this will be when we did the same, but we inverted it. So an inverted procedural baked dirt. And then when we press B, we get the stencils that were hand painted. So on the bottom left-hand side in global, I'm going to put input. And as I scroll through the frames, or UDIMS, I should say, then we can see our different stencils. The same would apply for the other channels as well. So if I press R to go back to red, so we can kind of make out what's going on. If I do the same, press G for green. So this is the inverted dirt. So we can see that's the base. Cool. Everything else I think was pretty much fine, as you'd expect. Let's jump into Maya now. Okay, so in Maya, I have the character, so the meet mat character. I grouped the pieces of mesh. I created a camera. I changed the focal length to about 80. That is just to remove some of the distortion. I created an Arnold sky dome, so you could do that. Go to Arnold Lights Sky Dome. Inside the sky dome, I added an HDR from HDRI Haven. And as you can see there, it was the one called Abandoned Tank Farm 04. And I picked that at 2K, renamed it to HDR. Oh yeah, donate to HDR Haven if you do use it a lot, because we don't want that place to disappear. It's super useful. So what I'm going to do is, I have already applied a shader, so I could actually show you what the result is, but I might as well quickly show you how to set up the shader. I've done this in another video. That was a test from earlier, that's why it looks pretty weird. So let's hit render. Actually, I'll create a new shader. Okay, so I'll select the whole character. By the way, the keyframes, the first 12, so this is a 360. The first 12 there, I realized I started to make a look dev turntable, but I didn't add in the chrome ball or anything because I don't really need it for this tutorial. But if you were wondering, the character group, that's 12 frames where it's doing 360. So it's jumping, I think 30-degree intervals, and then the same for the HDRI. If I wanted to do a turntable render. But anyway, the ID pass, so it should look like, actually, yeah, I'll create the shader now. Right, so I'll select all the character geometry, hold down right click, go to assign new material, and go to an AI standard surface, wherever that is. There we go. Okay, then I will open up the hypershade. Let's just get rid of all of this. Standard surface. Okay, I'll just call this character underscore mat for material, not for his actual name. Okay, so we'll quickly build this now. So this is, I guess, how to build a shader from substance. Oh, one extra thing we can actually do is Arnold by default, all the default settings are going to create TX files, which are MIP maps, which basically means they just have different, there are different iterations or sizes of the textures built inside. And by default, Arnold will create them on rendering. So when we hit render, it will start creating them unless you turn it off. But what we can do to avoid crashing, because I have had a crash when I've had loads of UDIMS trying to convert, we can pre-convert them. So I've loaded up the TX manager, so that's Arnold tab. And in utilities, TX manager, I've picked the folder where I saved the textures to, and then you can see it says 0 of 18. So it's saying there's 0 TXs in there, and then we can hit create TX, and effectively this should optimize our renders as well. Okay, the TXs have been made. I will open up the hypershade. So for the base color, I'm going to load the base color, but I'm going to pick the TX. So I can just pick any one, because then what I'm going to do is change the UV tiling to UDIM. I'll change the name of it, something that's useful like base underscore col for color underscore image, so I know it's an image file. It added a 1 because I've already done this earlier. Let's go down to metalness, load in the file, pick the TX as I said, wherever it is, TX. Pick UDIM Mari, name it something relevant, so I'm just going to abbreviate this, metal underscore image. One thing to note, I've said in one of my other tutorials, by default Arnold will pick alpha. However, there is not an alpha within this, so we're going to change this to pick information from one of the color channels. This is just a scalar texture, so it doesn't really matter. But if we don't change that, nothing, the object will not render as we would expect, basically. Let's go down to the roughness, do the same for roughness. Let's load it in. TX file, name it something useful, so rough underscore, image. I'm abbreviating them a lot, but that also means if you abbreviate things, then you can search in this bar at the top if you need to find a specific texture. Just makes life a lot easier. If you don't name things, then everything starts to be called file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I've changed the color channel there. I need to change the UV tiling mode to UDIM. For scalar textures, such as the metalness and roughness, you need to make sure this color space is raw. For the base color, because we're in substance, the color space would actually be sRGB. And let's go down. So the next thing, so we're going to add the height map, which would go into bump mapping. So we load the file, go to bump value, pick the file, the height map. So the TX, UV tiling mode, UDIM, rename. So the reason I keep saying this is just because I just want people to do things in an organized way. If you ever get to a point where you're working with others, just like having things organized is pretty crucial. Okay, so the trick here to make your renders look more how they should in Substance is, so we've put the bump map in to the shader, but now you'll notice that it doesn't look like there's anywhere else to put the normal map. So I've seen what some people do is they put their height map into displacement, which is fine, but you don't, it's going to be more costly in the render time. So what we could do is I hit tab, by the way, so tab creates this search box and then loads an AI normal map node. And in here we can click input, pick file, go to the folder, go to normal, pick the TX. So I'll just pick anyone, change the UV tiling to Mari, color space is fine, just rename it to something like norm_image. Okay, so we've got the color going into the input. Then on this node, then we can change the strength. And then what we want is the out value. We want to go into the bump 2D. Press OK. And there's an option called normal camera. If you don't have this pop up on yours, you need to go to display, show hidden. But because I've already done this many times before, it's already on mine. So by default, you'll probably just have pretty much all gray options. So you need to do that and then click on normal camera. So it's taking this normal map, and then allowing us to control it here. And then the out value goes into the normal camera. So it's combining here because then the out normal goes into the normal camera, which is basically the overall bump. The only thing is to make a note of is that the bump depth here is affecting both of these values essentially. So there could be some annoying, mix happening going on because you can control the normal map here, but then this is essentially controlling both. So worst case scenario, you could always create an AI color correct. And then what you would do is you would do the out color into the input and then out color R into there. And then you could, make it less extreme. So to do that, you would pull the gammas down or the value, exposure. If you want it to be more intense, then you would increase gamma, increase contrast, that sort of thing. Great. Okay, so we've got this. I think that's everything plugged in. So far I've done nothing with the ID. So let's just check that I've got this shader on the character. Okay, character matte. Let's go to the render view and go to beauty. Great, yeah, so it looks exactly the same. For the HDR, I've hidden it from the camera, as you can see, so that means we have the clear alpha. But you can see an old render there where, it wasn't. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Now, what we need to do is we need to get the ID working, because I don't really care about the texture. The texture's there just so you can see what's going on. So what we could do is we can create an AI flat. And so this is going to be a custom ID, essentially. So in here, we can load in our ID. So I'm loading in the ID, go into my textures, wherever it is, find the TX. Let's call this ID _ image. Change the UV tiling to UDIM. Color space. I'm going to leave it on raw, but I do think it should probably be RGB. sRGB, because it's just color values that we're using. So this AI flat, I'm going to call it AI flat _ ID. You can also use a node called aiUtility. This can be useful because in here, if I was using the aiUtility, the thing is, my copy of Maya differs to, So the last company that I worked at, I used this technique, but I was using aiUtility, but the options that were available were actually different. So I think either their Maya was newer than my Maya. This is Maya 2019, I think. I don't know. All I know is that the options, the output options were different, but you see in here you have a few different options like object ID. So if you apply that to an AOV, for example, that will look like a crypto mat. So it just gives a different color value to each object. But you can use an aiUtility for a few things and combine it with nodes like a sampler info node. You know, drag out information from here into a utility and put this into an AOV. That's kind of, I guess, advanced shaders. Advanced render passes. That's where you get into the advanced territory. I guess this is possibly advanced, but I don't know. AI flat ID. Okay, so we've got that. Now what we're going to do with this is we're going to put this into a custom AOV, so a render pass. So I created a bunch earlier, but I'm going to delete them all for the purpose of this video. So I'm going to call it ID RGB. Create that. Great. Now we have this shader slot on the right hand side. So I'm going to open up my hypershade. Because if I click on this checker box, it will just open up the create shader thing, which is not that useful. So I just want this shader into there. So this is the shader that will be rendered for this AOV. Okay, so this is the result. I just had to refresh my render view. Sometimes if your renders come out a bit funky and weird, you go to render, update full scene, because I was playing around before I started recording. So there's some history in my scene that it was picking up. So now this is what we've got. So we can actually press R, so for the red channel. This is the procedural baked dirt ID. G, so we have the inverted version of that. And then B, we have the stencils there. Oh, and A, that's alpha. So this is our ID RGBA. So now we have 3 different IDs just built into one pass. And that is our beauty. As you can see, it's not affecting the beauty. So what can we do with that? What we could do is, did I save a snapshot? I will save a snapshot, then go back to the hypershade. So for the shader, what we'll need to do is, we've got our AI flat and we need to combine it. So we can create an AI mix shader. There are some other options you have. There's an AI layered shader. Similar thing, you see it has 8 inputs by default, so you could technically layer things up a lot. But I've used this AI mix shader recently. In fact, this is what I used for my video called Wolverine Claws behind the scenes thing. Okay, so for this, what we want to do is we'll I'll middle mouse drop the character underscore matte material into the shader 1. And then this AI flat ID, I'm going to middle mouse and drop it into the mix weight, and it will pop up with this. So it's basically saying, what do you want to actually connect? So if you remember our AI flat ID, that was 3 separate colors combined together, so it'll be a bit confusing. So we want to pick one. So if you remember our color red, that was the procedural dirt, and green, that was the inverted version, and then blue was our stencils. So maybe we could pick the stencils. That'll be more interesting. So we're saying we want the blue color channel to go into the mix. So there we go. We see something's gone in. So now I could just close this, and now we need a shader underneath. So I'm just going to create an AI standard surface. Let's just pick something like extreme gold. Okay, I'll just call this gold. And let's select that and middle mouse drag the gold into there. So this mix shader becomes our final shader. So I have to rename this to character shader. Oh, that might get confusing because I've got this character matte. Anyway, it's up to you what you name things, I guess, unless you're working in a company. So let's select all these. You can see my mesh was green. That's because I actually deleted a shader that was assigned to it. So I'm selecting all these objects and then assign existing. Go to the character underscore shader. That was the latest one. Let's go to the render. Hit render. You can see I did a test there. And as you can see, we now have the stencils that were created in Substance in our ID. Actually, before I minimize that, and then we can also go to the ID channel. So that means now in our actual render, whoops. So now in our beauty render, we have this gold on our stencils. And this also means not only can that be controlled in LookDev, but this can also be controlled by comp because they will have this pass and they can shuffle out the blue channel and then color correct it as they feel necessary or do whatever else they fancy. So it's pretty cool, really. So let's do another version of this. Let's see what would happen if we change the output color. So in order to actually change what's coming out, you could also go there, out color green. Let's see how that looks. I'm sure it will look dreadful. Yeah, so this is inverted dirt, basically. It's working, but it just looks weird. So it's kind of good and bad, I guess. Right, so let's swap that back to the blue channel. So what we could do is, if we wanted to add another on top of that, it would probably be beneficial to use an AI layer shader. So put one in, put the mix in, and then put the next. I forgot what the order was. I remember using this a couple of years ago, and I swear at one point it was inverted. So this was the bottom, and then that was the top. Or I can't remember if it was the other way around. So in this instance, I'm just going to add in another AI mix shader. Layering shaders will cost more for render time, by the way. So what we could do is with that AI mix shader, I'm just going to call this final underscore shader. So shader 1, we could put in our mix shader. And then what we will do is I'll create another AI standard surface. Let's pick another preset. I'll just delete, get some of this stuff out of the way. Delete, let's do a preset. The preset will be, so some sort of dirt, there's blood. Okay, let's pick blood. I'm sure it will look dreadful. Let's call that blood. So put that in there, and now we need the mix. So rather than middle mouse drag and drop, we could actually just drag this. So we want the blood, maybe we want the blood to be on the outer side. So we pick the green, which is our inverted dirt. So now what we need to do is go back outside. Now we've created this new shader. That's why having the AI layered would probably be more useful. But for this, you know, for the purpose of this video, I'm just showing you, because that was the most recent shader that I used. Okay, so I've put on this new shader, so now we should have the gold and the blood. Whoa, that looks weird. I think I have transmission off. That's the problem with using blood. I bet it has transmission on. Let's see if it does. Transmission, it does. That's why it's rendering black, but something was rendering. That was a good guess. Let's pick something more noticeable. These are all pretty dreadful. Let's chrome. And what I meant with transmission being off, it was just here. By default, these were on. So in fact, maybe I should just put that to 2 and then go back. I'll just keep it on blood. Be more interesting, I suppose. It's all these extra renders settings. If I'm not using them, like volume indirect, that's for fluid simulations, that sort of thing. Subsurface scattering. The blood probably does have subsurface. Yep, okay. That's also another reason why it rendered black. So let's go back to the render settings. So I will just print screen, whatever that's called, snapshot. Holy moly. So what did we have before? So that was the default, and now we've gone from that to that. It's quite weird. But you see it's working. So let's reset that. Okay. So what we could do now is we could actually color correct. That's actually working quite well. So we've got the blood overlaying our stencil, and the stencil was pretty clean. Like we didn't add that dirt, that breakup. That breakup is actually coming from the green ID we created. That's pretty cool. So this is technically look dev work that we've just been doing. So this is something you could apply to your own models as well. So if we want to alter this looked at dev stuff, what we could do, let's say we want to make the blood a bit more contrasty. With having this ID pass as well, what we can do if we want to see the intensity of it on its own, we can actually flip to there, and I can press G on the keyboard. So we can see this is how it's looking for our green ID, which is the one we're using. So what I can do is I can actually color correct the green channel and then produce or alter this overall look that I'm getting in the beauty as well. Actually, we can see the green channel here and what it's doing, but looking in the beauty channel is a bit more confusing to see the end result. Okay, and hypershade to alter the effect of the blood, what we could do is, God, this is so annoying. You can minimize shaders by pressing this thing. We can color correct this here, this mix of the blood. So I can create an AI color correct. And from here, what I could do is I could do out color. Let's get rid of this connection here. And then from this AI color, whoops, I would just pick the green channel into the mix. So let's change this. Let's call it col _correct _green. Okay, so in here we can, let's increase the contrast to 1.5, and so gamma, if we put that up, that would increase the white values, so that would make it more prominent, basically. If we want to reduce the overall amount of the contribution, so if you want more blood, turn up the gamma or the exposure. If you want less blood, in this example, you could also reduce the exposure because it's darkening the image, and because it is because we're reading a single color channel, we're just essentially imagine it's a black and white image with white being on and black being off, which I've said in many of my other videos, just because it's the easiest way to understand all of this. So I've increased the contrast, and actually I'm going to put it quite high, so I'm going to put it to 2, and then let's just render that. So that's all I've done. So I will screenshot that. Snapshot, sorry, I keep saying that. Whoa, okay, look at what's happened. However, I will say this ID, now that we've added a color correct, it won't be affecting this ID, because this is taking what you see in this ID is the end result. So that is something to keep in mind. So what we'd probably have to do is, let's go back to the shader, hypershade, sorry. In order to get this result in here, what we would have to do is probably, sorry, I'm just thinking about this. We would have to, okay, from our ID here, we would have to do the color, out color to the input of this color correct, and then the out green into here as well. So what you can see happening is we should then be able to get the full control of our ID in that pass as well. But you can see here so our base ID texture from substance, the results from the red and blue channels are going straight into this AI flat ID, which is in our render pass, our AOV, sorry. But because we want more contrast in our green channel, we are picking this ID from substance and we are saying, okay, the out color, we want to color correct it. So we bring all that information in here, we color correct it, but then we just bring out the green into the green there. So that means when I hit render again, where is the render view? Let's hit render. Let's go to the ID. I should have snapshotted the ID. Oops, there we go. I will just reconnect this just to take a snapshot, just so you can see what's going on. So that's before and then after, so you can see what's happening. And then we're actually affecting the end result of that green color channel. Let's actually just view the green. Cool. So before and then after that color correct. So you can actually see what it's doing. Right, there we go. So I think that was a bit more advanced. I know there was, I was actually going to illustrate another way using utility nodes, but I think the end result we got was pretty interesting. So hopefully this has been of use, and I would say if you found the video useful, please feel free to subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, if you go to the Patreon, I do have a tier for only £3 a month. You can send any of your questions or queries to an email address you'll be given, and I will try and answer them as well. Higher tiers, you can also request tutorials that I will endeavor to make. But anyway, thank you for watching. Cheers.